As some of you likely know by now, I have a problem. I am unreasonably excited for the upcoming open world survival MMO Dune Awakening. Been talking about this game for well over a year now, and as we continue to inch closer to its release, my excitement has just been growing. Yes, I know the game is going to have issues, chief amongst those being the rather janky looking combat, and what I'm expecting to be poor performance, most likely, be that client side or server side, either or really, or maybe both, who knows. Despite those things, I'm still pumped to play the game. In fact, the more I see, the more I'm looking forward to it. There is a lot here that I like. No, it won't be perfect, but I'm expecting to have quite a lot of fun regardless, and that's why I play video games. After all, if I'm having fun, I'm happy. All right, so just the other day, Funcom held a massive 2-hour live stream. This thing was a honker with loads of new information, gameplay, and some interesting things both shown and discussed. This was the biggest reveal that they've done to date, and there's quite a lot here, so let's dive in. After a bit of an introduction and showcasing some previously released trailers, they then kicked things off with a live gameplay session where a host joined by 2 developers, the world director and environmental artist, talked through most of the experience, kind of detailing and sharing some information. Now, one of the first topics that they addressed here was the setting, the fact that this is set in the desert and how they are managing to try to make that less boring and be more than just like walking through vast swaths of sand and trying to keep exploration interesting. So the main takeaway here is they really focus on verticality as well as having lots of interesting vistas and points of interest, and that is in addition to having different varied areas, namely the testing stations and other points of interest that are going to help mix up the visual variety as well. We're going to see some more examples of that shortly here. While exploring, they pointed out that while you scout with binoculars, it's actually going to automatically add any points of interest that you scan right onto your map as well as onto the compass at the top of the UI. Plus, they mentioned the fact that you can place down your own custom markers. If you happen to come across, say, like a hidden treasure chest, you can mark it there for future reference as well. Now, next, they walked up to a trading post, the one that they previously scouted out. Now, we have seen these trading posts in prior gameplay reveals. They are relatively small locations in which you're going to find various NPCs you can buy and sell things from. You can pick up new quests. Specifically, these are called contracts, and they function sort of like area bounties or quest within a region where you have to complete some objective nearby and you're given rewards. We were also shown these Ornithopter pilots. These are used for fast traveling between trading posts that you've previously unlocked in a region, and it's going to be a way to access one of the 2 game's major cities. And you're also going to tend to see other players here as well because there's going to be people concentrating in this area to pick up contracts, to trade with NPCs, or to go to those Ornithopter pilots. Now, at the same time that they arrived at this trading post, one of those dynamic sandstorms were rolling in, and this was really cool because you could see it coming in from the distance, and then as it approached, the doors to the trading post actually started slowly physically closing in order to protect the players inside from the bypassing storm, because if you are stuck out in the storm, it is going to kill you. So it's something you actually have to physically take shelter from. Now, I will note that the storm blew over fairly quickly as the doors opened again about like 1 minute later. Ever since they first revealed these storms, I thought it was a pretty neat system, and it's cool to see like the world reacting to it. The fact that the doors physically close shut to protect you inside, or if you have your own base set up, those bases are shielded, so being inside those will protect you from the storm as well. Or you can even like enter cave systems or subterranean layers. That will be other ways for you to get out of a storm so you don't die as a result. So once the storm passed, they then left the trading post and walked to the player's base, which was right nearby. And in here we see various crafting and refining stations along with some item storage containers and some decorations all about. In here they converted some of the blood that they'd collected into water. Again, this is part of the hydration system. You've got to stay hydrated as one of your survival mechanics. And after that was done, they then hopped onto the back of a sandbike. So the sandbike is basically going to be your first early game vehicle. It's going to be one of the first things you can craft, and it lets you quickly traverse the sands to cover larger distances that you wouldn't be able to otherwise do on foot because because the sandworm would appear and kill you before you can make it across. So the sandbike is a key component to part of like sort of the progression through the first zone of Haga Basin. So they rode the bike to a nearby NPC called Derek Sinara. This is a planetologist, and it's one of the NPCs in the game that actually unlocks additional skill trees, although I'm not sure which skill tree it unlocks. Maybe there's a planetology skill tree, I don't know. But basically this plays into the class system. So the way it works is when you start the game, you're going to pick a class for your character. The 4 initial options being Swordmaster, Bene Gesserit, Trooper, and Mentat. And then that chosen class is going to determine the skill tree you begin with, as well as what active skills you initially unlock. However, as you play through the game, you can unlock any and all of the additional skill trees in the game. Although you can only have 2 active skills at a time, you'll be getting passive boost in those trees, as well as just the ability to swap which active skills you want based on the things that you've unlocked. And you do that by basically completing quest chains for NPCs like the one that they're visiting here, this planetologist Derek. So after visiting that NPC, they then jumped onto their sandbike and headed out again, crossing over this large expanse of sand. While doing so, we actually see one of those security drop ships off in the background. These are the ones that scan the surface of the planet side at night. And they mentioned here that if one of these spots you with their massive lights, it's actually going to temporarily stun you if you get spotted. And then they send in these mercenary troops to attack you. So I didn't realize in the past that it's actually a form of CC as well if you get spotted by one of those lights. So that was just a neat additional detail. They continue to drive on the sands until eventually a worm emerges. Now this is going to happen anytime you spend too much time in these open sandy areas. There's a vibration meter that tells you how much of a disturbance you've made. If you make enough, eventually the worm is going to emerge and start chasing you. And when they arrive, you have to get off the sands, because if they chase you and catch up to you, they will kill you. What you have to do is just look for any of these nearby rocky formations. Basically, if you see rocks, head to the rocks, because the worms can't go to that rocky ground. They can only move amongst the actual soft sand. So they drive for a little while longer until they eventually arrive at one of the major points of interest within Haga Basin, called the Western Vermilius Gap. Now, after getting off the bike, we actually see the player swap out their skills. They exchange the Shiga wire cable, like the grapple hook, for the Compel ability, which pulls distant targeted enemies towards you. And then they swap out their Charge Sprint ability for Sentinel, which is just a turret you place on the ground that does ranged attacks. After this point, the player begins scouting out the enemy camp, and here the host discuss the fact that they're going to be different camps that have different themes as well as visuals based on the faction of NPCs that inhabit that area. Now, I believe this particular point of interest that they've arrived at is a scavenger base, although I'm not certain. And then finally, after this, we get a look at some combat. The player approaches the enemy base, engages with some enemies using their 2 new abilities, the ranged pull as well as the turret, shooting and doing some melee attacks. And hey, you know what? Combat still looks rough. There's no denying that. The animations are quite stiff here. It doesn't really look like it's much improved since the last time we saw it. As I've mentioned in the past though, stiff and janky animations are pretty par for the course in most every survival game I've ever played, and it hasn't stopped me in the past from enjoying this genre. In fact, survival is one of my favorite genres next to MMOs, in spite of its shortcomings. But yeah, I mean, I can't deny the combat here doesn't look great, that is for sure. I'm hoping it's still fun to play, as I have had loads of fun playing other survival games with janky combat, so I'm hoping that's the case here as well. In fact, they do directly address the look of combat, saying that they will talk about it more in the future, but they're not doing it here in this stream. They're going to have a separate stream entirely focused on combat. So that means, I presume, that they are at least aware of it and planning to make some improvements. However further that takes it from its current iteration, I don't know, but it doesn't really look great at the moment. That aside, I gotta say though, this clearing enemy camps is one of my favorite things in these kinds of games. I just love it. Going in, killing all the enemies, opening the chest, collecting the treasures inside. This looks fun to me, especially in this massive open world with other players running around and you being able to do this stuff with your friends. It looks great. I can't wait to do it. The look of the combat aside. They also mention here that there's a lot of hidden areas all throughout the game, and we actually see an example of one of these with the player smashing through this barrier and revealing on the other side a cave with enemies and loot inside. Love it. Love to see it. Hope there's lots of this. Upon exiting the cave, the player does some harvesting. Now, we've seen this quite a bit in the past, but TLDR is you use a scanner and it reveals a weak points along the object, which you then have to physically trace the line. Well, you don't have to, but but doing so gives you bonus resources, so it's highly encouraged, basically. And then just around the corner from this area, the player then enters one of their other bases, so it's interesting to note that you can actually have multiple bases apparently in the game. This one was much more elaborate, multi-leveled, with a ton of different stations and decorations inside. It's here we see the player bugging out as they try to climb this ladder. I expect we're going to see lots of similar things in this game. Again, kind of par for the course for survival games. So yeah, I'm expecting to see some buggy, janky animations, getting stuck on terrain and stuff like that. It's going to happen. After walking through the base a bit, they then hop into an Ornithopter, which is a major vehicle and like a milestone moment in this game. This is what you need to actually get into the end game, which is the deep desert region. Now, from what I understand, crafting your first Ornithopter is going to take a while, upwards of 50 plus hours before you progress far enough and have the resources in order to make one. But also they are multiplayer vehicles with a lot of capacity. So if one person in your friend groups makes an Ornithopter, you all can make use of it essentially, either to get around in Haga Basin or to leave Haga Basin to head towards the end game. So they fly around in the Ornithopter for a while. They fly over this hole in the ground, which they said is one of the desert testing station locations. Now these desert testing stations are basically Dune Awakening's version of dungeons, akin to things like the shelters in Fallout or the dungeons in Skyrim, like enemy strongholds, but underground, filled with a ton of enemies and a lot more visual variety as well, as these testing stations have a lot of science and supernatural elements. So you're going to see different plant life and different ecosystems down here. We've seen quite a few examples of this in prior gameplay videos, and this is like the major way they're adding visual variety to the game beyond the sand-swept planet surface up above. Now, I'll also point out in this section of the walkthrough, it looks like you've got full and total freedom once you are in an Ornithopter. Like, we see them flying all the way up high into the skybox and landing on this massive stone structure high up in the sky. So once you have one of these, it does seem like you're going to be able to free to go pretty much anywhere you want, any fuel restrictions aside, of course. But yeah, it looks like you could just fly anywhere within the world once you have an Ornithopter, which is pretty cool. Now, while they were atop the stone structure, we see a spice blow, massive spice blow pop up, and this is where players are going to go to harvest spice, which is the game's most valuable and sought after endgame resource. It's supposedly used to fuel high-end crafting as well as player power progression. Also, while up here, they show us the location of one of the many secret hidden treasure chests in the world, like the ones in the caves that we saw earlier. The game is apparently going to have these sorts of treasures all over the place, and they're definitely worth looking for, as what you get inside is highly valuable. In this particular one, they find a purple unique schematic for crafting some good gear. While they're up here, they then use a survey probe. This is something that you shoot up into the air, and it basically marks any major resources, outpost, and other points of interest within your vicinity. And then they pull up the map, and you can actually physically see the newly marked icons that they spotted from that survey probe. Now, the next bit was probably one of my favorite moments in the entire stream. We got a good look at like the insane level of verticality this game apparently has. So after hovering in the air for a bit, they dove down into this massive canyon, flying deeper and deeper down through several layers, with it getting progressively darker the further down they went. Reaching the bottom, we then see all these bioluminescent plants. We see the entrances to enemy bases built into the rock walls. We see cave systems sprawling in every direction with like different light sources all over the place. It just looks so damn cool, both visually, but also just from the perspective of exploration. Like, I can imagine coming here on foot and then traversing down with how big this thing is, fighting enemies in between and searching for chests and finding different resources. Like, the whole thing seems like it could be a ton of fun and just add some interesting immersion and exploration stuff. Like, I love this stuff. I think this looks awesome. After spending a little time in the canyon, they then leave and fly to a nearby shipwreck. And this is, as it sounds, the remains of a large crashed ship. They are similar to things like enemy strongholds in that you're going to have to fight back groups of PvE enemies, clearing the area and then collecting any loot that you find. But also, they told us that every shipwreck in the game is a PvP area as well. So other players who are here can freely attack you. Now, this is going to be a trade-off for the fact that these areas have highly valuable loot found within them. And personally, I'm a big fan of these sort of mechanics and these kinds of spaces in MMOs, having these particular zones or points of interest that are PvP flagged within a vicinity. I just think it adds an extra layer of tension to exploring this and just to the entire world that I really enjoy. So can't wait to experience this. They also mention here as well that the different points of interest in the game beyond dropping just from like a basic loot table, each specific area will also drop items for particular parts of progression. So for example, shipwrecks like this one will be dropping items tailored towards weapon crafting at higher rates, whereas testing stations, those dungeons we mentioned earlier, those are more likely to drop vehicle components at higher rates. Now they added that if you don't want to do any particular types of content, so for example, like if you don't want to go to shipwrecks because you hate the fact that there could be PvP there, you are still able to trade for those components that you might be after with other players, as the game does have a marketplace or this auction house that you can freely trade with others, exchanging currency for whatever items you're looking for. Now, while at the shipwreck, the player comes across much harder enemies, these being from the Slaver faction. They use a lot more range weaponry than some of the other factions, as well as tossing these grenades that lock you in place, making you exposing you to their fire, basically. It's here that he fights a couple of heavies as well, which are basically like elites in the game. They've got more health and deal more damage than the normal variants. These particular ones wielding this LMG type weapon, and they also have this AoE pushback that stuns players if they get too close. After clearing a few enemies and collecting some loot, they then jump back in the Ornithopter and leave Haga Basin, heading into the Overland map. And this is the first time we actually see that transition as to how it works. You basically fly towards the edge of the map, the barrier, the exterior of Haga Basin, and you just load into this top-down overhead map. And this is how you head to the other, quote, maps or the other zones that are in the game. So as of now, there are 4 of these. It's Haga Basin, which is the starting area that's said to be roughly 80 to 100 hours worth of content, apparently. After that, the second actual playable zone is the Deep Desert, which is much larger than Haga Basin, about 9 times its size. This is where the endgame PvP and spice harvesting happens. And then finally, there are the major cities for the game's 2 main factions. This is Harko City and Arakin City. And this is where you engage with the faction system, as well as having trade NPCs, seeing other players, having the auction house, etc. Now, they're going to be adding more maps or zones in the future, but those 4, the Haga Basin, the Deep Desert, and the two faction cities, those are the 4 that the game is going to be launching with. They then fly to Harko Village and give us a little sneak peek for about a minute before ending the live gameplay preview section of the stream. Now, after this, they moved into talking about the game's music and audio. This was like 15 or 20 minutes worth of time. I appreciate good music, but really not a whole lot to say about this section here personally. If you are interested though, I suggest watching it yourself. They did release a video specifically going over the process of how they went about creating music for the game, which is again interesting if you care. Next, they went into discussion of the game's business model and post-launch plans, and there's something I want to talk about here. So the bullet point info is that the game isn't launching into early access. I've seen a lot of confusion about this. I think that's why they brought it up, because it seems like people were confused. It's a full-on release, not an early access release. They said there's going to be no monthly subscription. It's just $1 price up front. They are planning to have regular free updates that include new content, areas, features, and quality of life improvements, and they will also be selling, quote, optional DLCs, although they gave exactly 0 clarity as to exactly what will be included in those. We'll have to wait and see. If I were to guess, it's going to be similar to what they do in their prior survival game, Conan Exiles. I would expect pretty much exactly what they do there. They're going to be selling seasonal passes. This is going to be specifically giving you access to several of the DLCs at a single purchase price, or you can pay for these DLCs as standalone one-off purchases. Now, one big thing though is some of the editions of the game that they're selling are going to include a 5-day head start beginning on May the 15th. Now, of this, Joel said, sure, this allows people to get in the game early, but it also helps us to make sure we can balance the server load as people come into the game for launch for the best possible experience. And players who want the fresh start experience will be able to play on new servers, which will launch when the game launches on the 20th of May. And while I appreciate him saying this, what this obviously neglects, though, discussing is the entire end game and the Deep Desert, which isn't separate. This is where all the late game progression happens, and this is where the large scale PvP is going to take place. And from what they have said on several occasions, this is a single server for all intents and purposes. It is one massive play space that everybody shares. There is no phasing, there is no picking from a list of different server instances, nothing. If 200 players all decide to go and stand on one particular specific location in the deep desert, all of those players will always see each other, no matter what version of Haga Basin they were in before they went to the deep desert, because the Haga Basin and the deep desert are separate things. Haga Basin is instanced with player limits of around 40 people, but the deep desert is one massive shared space that every single person who travels from whatever version of Haga Basin that they were in, they're all going to the same area. So what this means is that there are no separate servers for deep desert. Even if you're starting on the real launch date, the non-early access launch date, you're going to have maybe your different iteration of Haga Basin, but when you reach the deep desert, you're going to be playing with the people who had the head start. So when they talk about people joining launch day servers, that only applies to the beginning of the game, the first half of the game, the Haga Basin. That zone, yes, it does have its separate instances, but when people eventually leave Haga Basin, when they make their Ornithopter and they head out into the deep desert, everyone's going to the same play space. So that said, players who get a 5-day head start are going to have a huge advantage in the fact that they're going to be reaching the deep desert quicker, they're going to be gearing up faster, they're going to be getting to higher levels, and they're going to be getting those end game vehicles, which all gives them power for fighting over harvesting spice, which is what everyone else is going to be competing over. We're going to be competing in the same region over the same spice blows, and that spice is like that's the ultimate end game currency that everyone's going to be fighting for. Spice is what you are after, and it plays directly into character power progression, which means that the players who start 5 days later and they eventually reach the deep desert, they're going to be at a big disadvantage. They're going to be way behind, and that could be a total mess. That is unless everything that they've said before isn't true and there are separate servers for the deep desert. But from what they have said on numerous occasions, including an interview that I had when I spoke directly with Joel Bylos, the game's head himself, I spoke to him, and the way he explained it is that no, they're not separate. And if that is in fact true, that means that the head start players will get a big advantage when it comes to controlling the end game and prepping for the end game and getting in a stronger position. And if all of that is going to function the way it's been explained and I expect it to, that's entirely lame, and that just sucks. People are literally going to pay to be able to get ahead, and then they're going to get in the deep desert. They're going to be higher level with better gear, with better equipped vehicles. They're going to be putting weaponry on their vehicles, and any people who walk into that PvP space 5 days later, they're just going to get smashed, right? Like I don't understand how they're not going to get absolutely steamrolled, but I guess we'll see. In the stream, they showcase the different pre-order editions. There's 3 of them. You got standard, deluxe, and the ultimate option. Those 2 higher, more expensive editions will include that early access, as well as the season pass, a bunch of cosmetics, and some other bonus junk. I just like this stuff. It's basically industry standard at this point, especially for these live service games. Still, regardless, I do not like it. Now, the final segment of the stream was a Q&A. I'm just going to rapid fire give you some of the answers that they gave. We learned that the game is going to have proximity chat, so you can speak with other players that you come across in the world. It's disabled by default, but you can manually enable it. I understand why they disabled it by default, because boy, you get open mics on by default. Some people are going to run into some interesting vocabulary when they first start playing these games. So I think it's smart that they started out with it disabled. They are going to have controller support at release. They even in fact said it was built with controller in mind. You can solo everything in the game, at least about 99.9% of it, they said. Although certain activities like harvesting large spice blows will be much harder as they require multiple vehicles. So you could technically do it, but it's going to be very difficult. The deep desert, they said, is 576 square kilometers. As mentioned, it's 9 times the size of Haga Basin, and Haga Basin itself is roughly 8,200 hours worth of content according to the dev. The deep desert uses server meshing, where it's basically broken up into different regions, and you seamlessly travel from one server to another as you move through the different areas. As you go from like south to north, you're going to be just seamlessly moving into the different servers, but it's all meshed together and it's one big play space. For practicality purposes, it is one large area that everyone shares simultaneously. They said Haga Basin is not full PvP, just those particular spaces like the Shipwrecks. Full PvP is confined to the deep desert. I will note though, you come into the deep desert from the south and the initial region is PvE only, and then you cross a threshold and then it's full PvP for like 95% of the surface area of the deep desert. But there's an initial area where you're safe, like when you first load in, and you got a little bit of buffer space there. Player bases do have decay mechanics, so as long as a base is powered, it is shielded and as such protected from sandstorms that come by. But if left unpowered, it decays over time, eventually being destroyed by said sandstorms. Now they did say you can pretty easily fuel your base for weeks at a time. Roughly 21 days is the limit before needing to have to log back in to refuel it. They also said you can build a base mostly anywhere. The only real exceptions are you can't build right next to or on top of any major points of interest. So you can't build a base inside of a stronghold or a trading post or a testing station, etc. But pretty much anywhere else around the world, you can place down a plot and build a base. Ornithopters can be equipped with rocket launchers. This is likely going to play a big role in the guild versus guild deep desert battles that take place. They even mentioned the fact that you can sit inside of vehicles and shoot out of them, or you can stand on top of vehicles and shoot your ranged weapons as they move around. Basically, your feet will be like magnetized to the top surface. So you can basically make like a battle bus of you and your mates rolling around shooting stuff. There's going to be a bunch of different types of vehicles with different sizes and capabilities, and these vehicles will be modular, so you can build different components to them as well. They said Dune will be coming to consoles, but no details as of when. Currently, private servers are something that might come in the future, but won't be there at release. They are planning to have new DLC updates every 3 to 4 months. Again, expect these to be similar to how they work in Conan Exiles. It's not full loot PvP, but if you die in PvP, you lose durability as well as any spice and resources you were carrying. And then finally, they said that the max guild size is 32 players. And that is pretty much it. That's basically everything in the 2-hour live stream condensed into whatever this like 30-minute video that we have here. Overall, I gotta say, I like it. This was a great update. Lots of cool stuff in here. In particular, I love seeing more varied points of interest. I love the attacking of enemy strongholds. The crashed ships were cool, and the fact that there's PvP there is even cooler. And I loved that massive canyon and all of its underground layers. Like, I'm really looking forward to exploring these kinds of spaces. Yeah, the combat still looks janky, absolutely. I hope, but am not expecting them to improve this much, if at all, prior to launch. I just think it's something that I've come to accept with most survival games. The combat isn't the best in the gaming industry, but in spite of that, I still really enjoy this genre, and I'm hoping that continues to be the case here. Lastly, though, I will say, I think this paid early access stuff absolutely sucks, and unless it works differently from how they've explained it, it's going to be a massive advantage for people to dominate the endgame deep desert. Players who start late are going to be entering into this endgame region, and they will 100% be getting rolled by people who had a 5-day head start on leveling, on gearing, on getting new skills, and on equipping and maxing out their vehicles. And that just blows, plain and simple, really. Now, beyond the fact that like the early access versions also cost more, so it's yet another FOMO-induced upcharge on our games. It's lame, dude. I don't like it. I don't like it at all, and I wish it wasn't the case. That aside, overall, I am still looking forward to checking out the game. It's just not very often that we get a large-scale open-world survival game with MMO elements like this. The jank and the crap monetization practices aside, this is exactly the sort of game and the sort of game structure that I love playing. And yes, I'm going to dive in and play with my friends, and I expect I'm going to have a heck of a lot of fun. Jank and all of its issues aside. So expect more coverage from me, as I'll definitely be diving in as once the game releases. But that is all for today. That is our update on Dune Awakening. I hope you guys enjoyed the vid. Let me know what you think about any of the topics covered below. The stuff you liked, the stuff you hate. What do you think about this early access? Are you as convinced as I am that it's going to be a massive problem when it comes to the endgame PvP? The fact that we're all sharing the same server meshing aside, we're all going to be sharing the same deep desert, and the people who have they're going to have a massive advantage. They're going to destroy anybody who shows up in the deep desert late. And maybe that's only a problem for the first week until those players eventually catch up, but I don't know. I just don't love it. Anyways, that's all for today. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time.